Tangled Hearts. Chapter 1. First Impressions. Lara stood in the doorway, her heart racing as she looked around the familiar yet changed surroundings of her hometown. It had been 5 years since she left. 5 years since she had stepped away from everything that reminded her of him. And yet, the memories, like old stubborn scars, still lingered, etched deep in the corners of her mind. The street was quieter now, the once bustling town square replaced by new coffee shops and sleek boutiques. It felt both strange and strangely comforting at the same time. She inhaled deeply, the sweet scent of freshly bloomed jasmine in the air, and began to walk down the familiar street. Her footsteps echoed against the cobblestones, and the sound seemed to reverberate inside her chest. Lara had always felt a strange sense of both belonging and disconnect when she returned here. This was where she had grown up, where she had met David, where their love had blossomed and fallen apart. And now, here she was, back in the town that held all her secrets. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, breaking her from her reverie. Lara pulled it out, glancing at the screen. It was a message from Jack. "You here yet?" She smiled softly, her fingers tapping out a quick reply. "Almost there. Can't believe I'm back." Jack had been her best friend for as long as she could remember. He had been her confidant, the one who had been there for her through all the tough times. And now, he was the one who had convinced her to return. There were some things left unresolved, things that only time and distance had yet to heal. But Jack always knew how to make her feel at home, even when everything else felt like it was falling apart. She walked a little faster now, eager to reach the coffee shop where she and Jack had agreed to meet. As she approached the small cafe, nestled between a flower shop and a bookstore, her eyes caught sight of a figure sitting at one of the outdoor tables. Jack. His back was to her, but she could recognize his posture, the way he always leaned slightly forward, as if he was waiting for someone. He hadn't changed much. Still the same warm smile, the same easygoing demeanor that made people gravitate toward him. She took a moment to observe him, the same way she had when they were younger, before walking up behind him. "Long time no see," she said softly. Jack turned around, a grin spreading across his face the moment he saw her. "Lara!" He stood up, pulling her into a tight hug. "You're finally back. I thought you'd never come." His voice was full of warmth, and for a moment it felt like nothing had changed between them, like they were back to their old selves. Lara pulled away, smiling faintly. "Yeah, well, life gets in the way sometimes." She sat down at the table, and Jack followed suit, immediately pouring her a cup of coffee from the pot in front of him. "How's everything been here?" she asked, wanting to fill the silence with something. Anything to distract her from the emotions that were swirling inside her. Same old, Jack replied. But there was a flicker of something deeper in his eyes. A few changes here and there. You know, the town's still the same. People come and go, but it's still home. "Yeah," Lara said, her voice trailing off. "Home." There was a brief silence, and then Jack's gaze softened. "Are you okay? Coming back after all this time? It must be tough." Lara hesitated. "I think it's harder than I thought it would be." She swallowed hard, her throat tightening as memories of her past with David flooded her mind. She had promised herself she wouldn't think about him, but here, in this town, he was impossible to avoid. Jack noticed the change in her demeanor and gently placed his hand on hers. You don't have to talk about it, Lara. But you know I'm here, right? You've always got me. She nodded, grateful for his support, though a part of her wondered if even Jack could understand the weight of what she had left behind. The love she had felt for David, the hatred that had followed, the betrayal that still stung. Would she ever truly be free of it? The air around them shifted slightly, and Lara couldn't help but feel like something, or someone, was missing. There was an emptiness, like a presence that lingered in the background. She didn't know why, but she felt it strongly today. Perhaps it was just the weight of returning, of confronting the past. But for the first time since her arrival, Lara couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to come face to face with it all. And then, as if on cue, the door to the cafe swung open. Lara's breath caught in her throat. David. He stood in the doorway, looking just as he had when she last saw him. Strong, commanding, his eyes just as captivating as they had been years ago. She froze, unable to tear her gaze away from him. The years had passed, but in that moment, it felt as if time had stood still. Every emotion she had buried, every word left unsaid, surged to the surface. Jack followed Lara's line of sight and frowned. I wasn't expecting him to show up, he muttered under his breath. Lara didn't reply. She couldn't. She could feel her pulse quicken, her chest tightening, and despite everything, despite all the pain he had caused her, she found herself unable to look away. The connection between them was undeniable. And even after all this time, it hadn't faded. David's gaze swept the room, and as if sensing her presence, his eyes locked with hers. For a moment, everything else in the world seemed to disappear. And then he smiled. It was the kind of smile that could melt your heart or shatter it, depending on the way you saw it. The kind of smile that had once made her believe in love. The kind of smile that now made her wonder if anything between them could ever truly be repaired. Lara quickly looked down, her heart racing. She couldn't deal with this. Not right now. Not with everything still so raw, so unfinished. Are you okay? Jack's voice broke through her thoughts, but Lara couldn't respond. She couldn't tear her eyes away from David. David slowly approached their table, his eyes never leaving hers. Lara, he said softly, as if testing the name on his tongue. It sounded so familiar, so foreign, all at once. Her breath caught. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. David's gaze flickered to Jack, his expression unreadable. I didn't expect to see you here, he said to Jack, though it was clear his focus was entirely on Lara. Jack looked from David to Lara, sensing the tension. Yeah, well, it's a small town, he said casually, though Lara could tell he was trying to diffuse the awkwardness. David gave a slight nod, his eyes never leaving Lara's. It's good to see you, he added, his voice soft, but carrying an undertone that made Lara's stomach tighten. Lara swallowed, her thoughts a jumble. She had no idea what to say to him, no idea how to handle the emotions that were crashing over her like a tidal wave. How could she look at him again, after everything that had happened? And yet, there he was, standing in front of her, like no time had passed at all. This, she realized, was just the beginning of everything coming back. And she wasn't sure if she was ready for it.